it's Stephanie, and today I wanted to talk about all the books that I read in August. So what I'm going to do is start out from my lowest rated to my highest rated, and my two highest rated books have upcoming adaptations. Like, I'm really excited about that. So I didn't have like a lot of losers this month. Like, my lowest rated is like a 3-star. Guys, it made me really sad because I have read everything else by this author and I have loved everything else he's done, but this was a dud for me, which was a shame because it was the first book that we read for the Dying to Read book club on Goodreads, hosted by April at Getting Hygge with it. And this was Nick Cutter's The Deep. So the premise of this story is that there's this plague that's taking over the world that's called the Gets, which is short for forgets. And basically, it's kind of like dementia, but it's just affecting everyone. And it's just like non-discriminately just affecting like a ton of people. But basically you just forget you forget your name, then you forget just how to do things, and your body just forgets to like breathe or do normal bodily functions that you need to survive, and you die. So our main character Luke gets a call from his brother, who is a scientist who works in this like top secret lab located 8 miles underwater in the Mariana Trench, where he is looking to find a possible cure for the Gets. And then needless to say, like, stuff happens. So I think like the scariest parts were the descent, getting in a submarine and going 8 miles underwater to like an underwater lab facility. Obviously, like, successful horror has to build up on human fears, and I feel like being claustrophobic and being trapped is a definite human fear. I could not handle being 8 miles underwater. I would say the second half of the book just kind of totally lost me, and we really didn't ever talk about like the Gets that's plaguing the world. I just felt like it kind of lost its way. I don't know, it just didn't work for me. I just loved the troupe, and I really liked Little Heaven. Little Heaven was my first, and I really enjoyed it, and this just didn't live up to either of them for me. Second book I read was The Rules of Magic by Alice Hoffman. I was really excited to get this book because it's a prequel to Practical Magic. If you've seen the movie or read the books, this is kind of the backstory of like the kooky ants that live in that Victorian house. I guess I wanted a little more from it, and I guess what I love about Practical Magic is kind of like the cozy like magic, like mixing herbs from your garden to like heal heartaches and like stuff like that. And this did have some of that. It didn't give me quite what I wanted in the story. The next book, which is kind of like a 3.25, is LaRose by Louise Erdrich. This was like a super interesting story. This takes place in North Dakota. There's 2 families up there that are neighbors, and they both have children. And one of the dads is going hunting on his property, and he thinks he sees a deer, and he shoots, and he accidentally kills his neighbor's son. And after going to like a sweat lodge and talking to a tribe, he kind of comes to the conclusion that the only way to make up for what he's done is to give that family his son that was around his age, and that child's name is LaRose. So LaRose is kind of this compensation. So he has to go live with this neighbor family and fill the void of their dead son. The premise I thought was so good, and I thought she did a really good job of handling grief, which if you've seen my 4 of a Kind videos, I think there's just something so raw about stories about parents who have just lost a child. And I think she really did tap into like the different ways people handle that, because in this case, both families in a way have lost their child. And the new family, the kind of stuff that they project onto LaRose, and his real family, who's having to deal with not having them in their house and him being so close but so far away. I think where this book lost me was that it had like multiple timelines, and there was elements of like magic here and there, and I just got kind of confused. The villain of the story was a little too cartoony for my taste too. He didn't have a lot of depth, but I've heard she's a great author, and a lot of people really like The Roundhouse, so I might give that a try. So the next book was a 3.5, and that's really not the fault of the book. It's more my fault because I didn't have enough prior knowledge going into this book. And that was Margaret Atwood's The Penelopiad. This is a kind of retelling of the Odyssey from Odysseus's wife Penelope's point of view. So I did a buddy read of this with Lauren at Burn Fiction, who, if you know her, she is like so awesome. Like, you need to go check out her channel because she is just awesome. And she like majored in Greek classics. So she was like the perfect person to read this book with because she just shed so much light on stuff. I read the Odyssey in the 9th grade, which was, oh my god, that was 12 years ago. Oh wow. So I kind of got the main story of the Odyssey, which was enough for like the other two kind of retellings that I read. Like for Song of Achilles, I knew like the main story, and that was enough to enjoy it. This, I felt like you needed to know more. You needed to be familiar with like certain details to really get the full scope of it. And I wasn't. So I think just a lot of it was lost on me. But if you are very familiar with the Odyssey and would love a like feminist retelling from like a woman's point of view, I would check this out. I just think I wasn't the right audience, or I need to reread the Odyssey and read this again, for sure. So the next novella that I read was Some of Your Blood by Theodore Sturgeon. This is kind of a horror novella, very heavily inspired by Bram Stoker's Dracula, in that it kind of deals with vampires and it's told in an epistolary format. Basically, I can't tell too much about this story, but basically our main character is in the military and the censors are going through like outgoing mail and they find his letter that he is sending to his girlfriend back home to be a little disturbing. So they call him in, basically send him to therapy, and what you're reading is basically like the paper trail between the higher ups in the military and his transcript from his like therapy sessions, and it's really interesting. It's a horror novel, but like nothing about this is scary. Like if I had to rate it, it's maybe like half a screaming face emoji, but like it's not scary at all. I think it's just really interesting look at that kind of fiction. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you, definitely check it out because I really enjoyed it. I thought it was done pretty well. So my next book was also kind of a horror novella, and this is The Pretty Ones by Ania Ahlborn. This is the first Ania Ahlborn book that I have read, and I really enjoyed her writing style. Basically, this takes place in the 70s during the Summer of Sam, so that obviously puts it in New York. And our main character is Nell, who is kind of a plain Jane, and she works at a call center, and she kind of just really wants to fit in with like the pretty popular girls at this call center. And she finally makes a friend, and that friend ends up getting murdered, and it's basically following that story. So I thought this book was really interesting. I think I only kind of rated it down because like I figured out the ending before the ending, and I don't know, that always kind of takes the enjoyment away from me. But other than that, it was really interesting, and like I said, I have bought 2 of her other works that I definitely plan to check out soon. My next read was a solid 4-star read. This is The Damnation Game by Clive Barker. So this book deals kind of a lot with like gambling and like gambling addiction, and there's kind of a supernatural being that like never loses a bet, and he's coming back to reclaim his debt, and there is a convict who is released early from prison to be basically this like multi-millionaire's bodyguard, and these stories kind of intermingle. I like Clive Barker. A lot of his stuff is really hit or miss for me because he tends to go into like that more fantastical element of horror, which is just really not my thing. But he does do a lot of body horror, which I really enjoy. So there was like elements of this novel I wasn't a huge fan of, but there was a lot of things in this novel that I really enjoyed. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you know I don't do long books well. And I went into the beginning of this book and I was breezing through it and I loved it. I got like 65% of the way through though, and long book fatigue like hit me, and I was like, just want this to end. It's never the book's fault. It's always my fault that I'm like, oh, like this is usually about the time that a book should be over, and this one's not. I definitely still do want to check out more Clive Barker because I read like books 1 through 3 of the Books of Blood, and I feel like it was kind of like an even split of like the kind of horror that I liked versus like the super fantasy heavy stuff that I didn't like. So the next book that I finished was one that I talked about in one of my earlier videos, which was a book that I had put down that I was planning to pick back up and finish, and I did just that. So this is Empire Falls by Richard Russo. This takes place in a small town in Maine that was once like a prominent logging town that has definitely seen better days. Our main character is Miles. He's kind of like this sweetheart diner owner who his wife is getting remarried, like his teenage daughter is having issues at school. So it's about dealing with all that stuff and dealing with current family drama and family drama from his past. So this book was really good. I think I definitely the reason I put it down the first time was that it hit a slow patch. It hit just like a slow part, and I was probably juggling like 3 other buddy reads at the same time, and this book was just kind of lagging. But overall, I thought it was really good. Some of the like the daughter storyline at the end seemed a little too like teen soapy for me. But other than that, I thought it was really good. And this was a book I had put down, and when I picked back up, I didn't need to read, like, I knew exactly where I was, and I knew who the characters were. And I really think that does say something about the story, that it really did stick with me a year later. There was an HBO miniseries adaptation that I thought did a really good job. So my next 4-star read is The Cutting Season by Attica Locke. This was a mystery that I had heard about on Rincey and Katie's podcast, Read or Dead, where they talk about mysteries and thrillers. And this takes place at a plantation in Louisiana, and the main character, Karen, is a general manager there, and this plantation hosts weddings there, and they do like walking tours. But one night there is a body of a female kind of migrant farmhand found with her throat slit on plantation property from the neighboring farm. It turns out that this murder might be closer to her than she knows, and it might be putting her family in danger. I really enjoyed this book just because the main character, Karen, kind of has to deal with her relationship to this particular plantation. Her mother had worked there before her as a cook, and she had a relative who worked there a long time ago as well. And there's like rumors of certain rooms being haunted and like certain things from the past coming to light. And it was really interesting. And I also thought this book did a really good job of tackling race, as did the next book that I'm going to talk about that I am super stoked about. So the next book is Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff. This is a horror novel that's getting an adaptation, guys. Jordan Peele of Key and Peele, who did, Get Out, that was wildly successful, is working on making this an HBO miniseries, because this is one of those short story novels where like each chapter kind of follows different characters, but they're all like a group of friends. It takes place in the 1950s during the Jim Crow era, and like the first story is about these people taking a kind of road trip to save our main character's father, and they have to drive through like Jim Crow country, and they get stopped by cops all the time, and it is like intense. There was just so many little details about the story that I loved. So like the main character's uncle puts out a guidebook every year called like the Negro's Safe Travel Guide that lets them know like what highways to take and like what restaurants will serve them and like what hotels will let them stay there and treat them well. Our main character also is like a big sci-fi and horror nerd, and he gets a lot of flack from his father because he's really into like H.P. Lovecraft, who was like an outspoken racist. And he's kind of trying to like come to terms with like, can I be a fan of this if like its creator hated people like me? And there are blatant themes of like the savage in these stories. Like, can I still enjoy them? I just thought there was like so much stuff that it talked about, and it did well. And like every story tackles like a different kind of horror. Like there's like a haunted house story and a story where someone goes to like a different dimension. And what I love about this story is that in these stories there is obviously these supernatural horrors, but I feel like the scariest part is the real life racism that they feel, and I feel like he did that well without being like, you get it, like the people are the real horror in this. Yeah, without being just like condescending and in your face like that. I thought it was just done really well. He is doing like a mini series where like each of these stories and chapters is going to be an episode. I am so excited about this. I am here for this for sure. The last book I read this month, which I mean has the same rating as Lovecraft Country, they're both like 4.5 stars for me, is Where'd You Go Bernadette by Maria Semple. This was delightful. I loved it. So this follows Bernadette, who is eccentric, kooky, a little agoraphobic, and she and her family live in Seattle, which she hates for some reason. She just like despises living there and like the Seattle culture. Her husband is a Microsoft guru, and her daughter is like this genius prodigy, and Bernadette was also kind of a genius herself. And this story is told through like emails and faxes and like correspondence. And Bernadette is just so quirky, and she hates going outside, so she has like a virtual assistant in India like make doctor's appointments for her and like order dinner and make reservations and stuff like that. After a failed intervention, like Bernadette goes missing, so the daughter has kind of pieced together like the story of all these correspondences to try to find where Bernadette could be. So this was just so fun. I absolutely love this. And this is getting an adaptation. It's a movie with Cate Blanchett as Bernadette. And it's currently filming here in Pittsburgh. So my sister-in-law likes to be like an extra in things that are filming. So she was actually an extra in a scene with Cate Blanchett, which was really good. Also, like, Kristen Wiig is going to be in it. It just seems like really fun. So I am totally looking forward to that. So if you haven't read this, it's delightful. Just go read it. Anyway, guys, those are the books that I read in August. Let me know if you've read any of these, what you think. I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!